Hey, what's up, guys? Little man with a big opinion here. So, it was probably about a year and a half ago that I made a video talking about the IFAC that I put together. And in today's video, I'm going to go over its bigger brother. This is the, first aid trauma kit that I keep in my vehicle everywhere I go. And after taking a wilderness first aid course, I kind of adjusted a few things and just wanted to show y'all, the finished product. Uh, so, to start things out with, the reason why I went with this container, and I don't really care much for the color, it doesn't bother me. I could have matched everything up doing like a dark earth. Um, but the specific thing that I like about this bag is I don't own it yet because everything costs money. But I can molly this into basically anything. I can put it on my ruck. I can put it on a day bag. You could technically put it onto a plate carrier, but this would be, really massive on the plate carrier. But the way this is set up with this buckle system on it is you can undo the buckle and the red handle, this whole thing, the Velcro comes off. It's just a fairly new bag. So eventually, when I do, I want to buy a seat cover for the truck that's got Molly over the back that I can, plug and play, figure stuff out. But I can stick this on, grab it by the handle, pull it off, and I can take it with me, to whatever scene that I'm responding to. Unless whoever you're helping is, right next to your truck, that turns into a problem. I like that it has a red handle, and, I also put a patch on it. It's just a little first aid patch, and I threw a, American flag on there. Um, you know, I could, if I wanted to, get something that says first aid or medical, but, I think the giant Red Cross on there does that for you. Oh, I got the zippers up top. I do think, this strap is a little bit excessive. It just Velcros down onto the back. So I've debated cutting that one off and just dealing with the zippers. But, I know if you super stuff this thing full, zippers might not be enough. And so I specifically set this first aid kit up, in parallel with carrying a firearm. I think it is nearly as important. It's a 50-50. It's a give and take. It's a yin and yang. You got to be able to put holes in people and protect yourself. And you also need to be able to plug holes in people. The zippers on this, make it to where when you fully open it, which I gotta move this guy out of the way, it lays out completely flat. That way you can access, everything inside here. One of the first things I did when I got it is I took the cat tourniquet out of its, plastic holding, and I just kind of, prepped it and set it that I can easily, slip it on. I have debated, having a second tourniquet, but for now, you know, I think this is probably one of the more important things in here. Uh, I have a triangular bandage, which I thought was kind of neat that the plastic that it comes in, it shows wrapping someone's front and back. It shows using it as a tourniquet, bandaging a knee, bandaging a head or eye, or the most generic things, turning it into a sling. Uh, so, this is basically a bandana. So you can take this out, take this out of this container, if you're someone that carries some bandana all the time. Like, I probably wouldn't carry this while I'm, backpacking because I'm going to have several bandanas with me. It came with a very, very liberal amount of splint. It's foam. I don't really remember exactly, what this one is called. Um, what I did like is 36-inch splint. What I did like, again, just the way that it gets packaged, is they show you on here, hey, strong C curve, stronger reverse C curve, strongest a T curve. They show using this to stabilize the neck, leg, knee, foot, wrist, finger, different parts of your arm. This goes in conjunction, using this to tie around it. Typically I keep duct tape with me, and I would probably use the duct tape. Rope, paracord, anything that you can secure this as a splint is going to work out great. Tossed in a little CPR mask. And this one specifically also comes with a pair of gloves. Inside of this, it's kind of hard to show it, but on the first half of it, it has an additional little flap that comes down. And try not to drop stuff. We got a package of gloves. We got our first aid tape. And, we got a, pretty heavy duty piece of, or several pieces of gauze. It's a 15 by 23 inch is the gauze that's inside this container. And there is a bit more room in this top pocket that I can add a little bit more stuff. But, it just kind of zips away, goes out of the way. I got a tiny Sharpie, which I don't think I have one sitting on my desk anymore. Wonder if I have one sitting in here. Oh, I do. So, full size regular Sharpie, it's about half the size. Writing the time on the tourniquet. If you're checking vitals, one of the things that I was always taught is, you use what you have. This comes with a little piece, or I've got like a little, Write in the Rain notebook that I pulled a couple pages out and slid in here. But if you don't have that and you've got a Sharpie, write them down on their arm. And you can put a time. Like you can, put, 10, 15. Here's the heart rate, comma. Here's the heart rate, comma. Here's the heart rate. And you can write, checked every 15 minutes. Write whatever you want on them. You can write the time that you put a tourniquet. When I was in the army, a bunch of medics, talked about writing that on their foreheads. So it's right there out in the open. Pair of scissors. They're not regular scissors. They're trauma shears. They've got, the dulled ends so you can cut clothes off. It'll cut through, the wire on bras and stuff. That way you can, bandage people up, perform CPR. Going further in here, compression bandage. This is very similar to the Israeli bandages that I've used before in the past. This one that I bought, which I really didn't look at the brands. Everlit Survival. So they're the ones that made that one. There's some things, I won't really consider it cutting corners, but, a bandage is a bandage. It's made out of material that, helps stop bleeding. You buy what you can buy. Elastic bandage, this is another thing that you can use with the splint. Also using it. The first thing that comes to my mind is like an ankle sprain. But, you can also use this, to help with your head, neck, spine support. Oh, and that's that pouch. And this bag, it has elastic in it. So on this side, the elastic goes this way, and on the other side, the elastic is going up and down. So you can, really plug and play. Like this, was tucked into a pouch here, but it does fit in this elastic. I'm not saying, you have to buy this pouch. Some people would say, well, that's not enough stuff. I need a bigger container. If you need a bigger container, you buy a bigger container. This is kind of a in-between between a individual IFAK and a trauma kit. It's up to you, what you do. This bag came with, this, severe trauma, which, they've got 9-line on the back. So military guys are probably buying this stuff. Stay prepared, emergency contact info. This is probably mostly for you. Name, age, blood type, note allergies, medical conditions, doctor info, emergency contact 1 and 2. But then they have listed out, like on this last page, how to treat open chest wound. They give a definition, condition. An open chest wound, also known as a open pneumothorax, is a serious injury that could be life-threatening if not treated properly. Symptoms: difficulty breathing, chest pain, rapid heart rate, hypertension, or low blood pressure. Treatment: if you suspect that someone has an open chest wound, it's important to call emergency medical services immediately and initiate first aid measures as soon as possible. Step 1: call for emergency medical services. Cover the wound with a sterile dressing. This can be a commercial chest seal, Vaseline / Xerofoam wound dressing, or improvised with non-permeable materials, i.e. plastic wrap, that is large enough to cover the wound. Secure the dressing on 3 sides, leaving one side open to allow air to escape. Monitor breathing, pulse, and level of consciousness. If condition worsens or they go into shock, begin first aid for shock. They explain doing that. Continue to monitor vital signs and conditions until EMS arrives. So, you know, I'm not saying it's, the proper time to be reading this when you're trying to administer first aid. You should take, some sort of class. And even me, I would say, um, they skipped a step. The very first step should be, uh, make sure the scene is safe. I would especially say that for an open chest wound because, they explain, doing the three sides. Uh, and, the possibility of you also receiving an open chest wound might go up if the scene is not safe. Obviously, you provide care up to your level of training. We also have the Good Samaritan law in the United States. So if you are, in good faith, providing medical care or trying to save someone's life, you do the best that you can do. That's the last one on here. Severe bleeding of the limbs, deep arterial bleeding, hypothermia and hyperthermia, blood, bone fracture. Uh, I like that saying right there. Stay calm, act fast. Trauma injury 101. Then they explain other stuff. Universal combat splint, uh, thermal blanket, rain poncho, uh, needle decompression. This also shows, instruction, non-vented chest seal, um, nasal airway supply, massive hemorrhaging. They talk about massive hemorrhaging a lot because they're showing it in different places. Using, the idea of tactical combat casualty care or TCCC, and then using the March algorithm. I'll go ahead and read through the March algorithm since we're this far. This is the order of taking care of someone. Massive hemorrhaging. Massive hemorrhaging basically means if you are not doing something to actively stop that bleeding, you've got about 90 seconds before that becomes life threatening. Airway, you get a little bit more time because, we can hold our breath longer than it takes us to bleed out. Respirations, this mostly deals with chest injuries. Circulation, and then hypothermia. So, this is the kind of thing that if you buy something, typically first aid kit, first aid supplies, you're probably going to get something like this. If you've never done any of this stuff before, read this, watch videos on YouTube, take a class, become better trained. Compression gauze. I really like that a lot of this stuff is vacuum sealed because it makes its profile smaller, which means I can pack more stuff in here. Just a good old space blanket. And I really liked this one because 99% of these, they look like tinfoil. They're just like a silver color. This one is a bright yellow, at least on one side. It looks like the other side might be, the silver color. And this is made in Canada. But I specifically went with this one because, you know, half of my scenarios involve being out in the middle of the wild. You know, this is like a giant signal flare saying, hey, you know, come find me. You know, just a bunch of alcohol prep pads. I put them inside of a Ziploc bag. You know, these are the kind of things that, you know, you buy a dime a dozen. You know, you get a box of 200 of them from Walmart. Again, this is one of those items that, you know, I just kind of grabbed a fistful. There's probably 20 of them in here. You might not want to pack 20 of them in there. You might want to pack 5. You might just pack one of those. Completely up to you. Pulling more stuff out. Oh, I guess I put 2 of these in here. I have another triangular bandage. And again, like this is showing what color this one is. This one's white. You know, it's showing that I'm not paying that much attention because I have 2 triangular bandages in here. You can never have enough stuff. Oh, let's see if I had anything else tucked. Nope. And then this Ziploc bag, you know, I've got 2 by 3 inch, you know, just gauze dressing. I think I've got a couple of them in here. 1, 2, 3. You see, this shows that I'm not paying attention. Oh no, I am paying attention. Those are alcohol wipes. This is like a Germ-X wipe. Some bigger band-aids, some smaller band-aids. You can never have enough band-aids. You know, this bag is kind of just like a boo-boo kit bag. You know, my son scrapes his knee while we're hiking. It might be easier to just take a Ziploc bag and, you know, put it in your pocket. It is tucked in there. You know, I've got my nasal airway, and, you know, that's the stuff that I got in here. You know, a few things that you can possibly add if you want to be a little bit more well-rounded is, you know, you can add stuff for doing sutures. You know, this is kind of set up in a way that I'm going to be doing more stabilizing and waiting for people that are smarter than me to show up and do that kind of stuff. You know, even EMS isn't doing sutures out in the field. That's what I didn't see in here. I bought it. It's not sitting here, but the 3-way or the 3-part airway. So it's probably still sitting on my front entryway because I ordered this and I got a bunch of stuff in and I put it together. And I guess I didn't grab everything before I started this video. That's okay. If you don't know what it is, it's basically a tube that goes inside your nose that can help provide, you know, an open airway. And it's not something fun. You know, they kind of explain to us using, you know, the chest decompressor. But you don't use that on someone unless you need it. Um, but we did get the nasal airway put in, and they make a gel for it. It helps lubricate and make it go down. Uh, the army medic that taught me how to do it says you just spit on it. The least of their worries is germs. They're more worried about other things. And see, I sat here and zipped it all up and left the Sharpie out. But that's why I like Molly, because I can just add the Sharpie to the outside, slide it through the Molly, and that could be its new spot. And I guess that also could have been done with the big Sharpie, and it can stay tucked in out of the way as well. So, for now, this just kind of hangs out in my passenger seat. You can toss it in the pocket behind your seat. Eventually, when I get the Molly backing, I can set this up, to be a quick detach and be all tactical and everything. But, for now, it's a non-issue. So what I would say is, get the bag that you want to get. You pick your size. You kind of base it off of your needs. If you've got 5 kids, maybe you get a bigger bag. If you're a Lone Ranger, maybe you get a smaller bag. The nice thing about most medical supplies is it doesn't expire. Like your gauze, the packaging that the gauze comes in is going to deteriorate before the gauze does. Your tourniquet, hopefully your tourniquet, I knew that was too easy. I left the splint sitting out. Hopefully your tourniquet falls apart before you ever have to use it. So you kind of buy this stuff once. Some of it's expensive. And you just kind of sit there and hope you never have to use it. But the day that you do have to use it is the day that you're going to be very happy that you purchased all of this stuff. Sometimes I kind of think you do something once and you remember it for a very long time. And that's, I've been a lifeguard for a really long time. And that's kind of how I feel about, doing CPR. I've done CPR every 2 years since I was 15. I've almost been a lifeguard for more time than I wasn't a lifeguard. And it's fine to take your time to pack this stuff in. I think I put it in a little differently because this side doesn't want to zip up. And in your emergency situation, doesn't really matter. You open it up, all your stuff kind of falls out. It makes it easier to see it. You can worry about picking it up and organizing it later. You're focused on saving a life. So, looking around, double checking again. We've got it all packed back up in here. So you get the stuff, and it's almost as important. It's probably actually more important to know how to use it. To know, what you're capable of dealing with. And from that point, you just kind of wing it. Like if someone broke their finger I'm not going to cut a piece off of that splint. Um, I'm just going to use some of the tape and tape it to the finger next to it. Uh, if I'm in a heavily wooded area, I'm probably going to use a stick before I use the splint material. Like that splint material could probably come out because, there's straight rigid objects everywhere that you can use to stabilize, an arm. You know, I'm not saying it's the best thing to use because, you've got an axe head on here, but, a broken forearm, this can stabilize it. So, yeah, probably not the best thing to use, but you'll probably have a hatchet with you. The only other thing that, I could possibly add to here that I would really like to have is maybe some more duct tape. Um, but, you know, let me know your thoughts down below. You think I got what I need? Should I add other things? Should I take things out? It's a pretty good size. I don't think I have much sitting here for reference. I guess I have another tourniquet. It's a good size bag. I feel better having the contents of this bag. Get the size bag you want. Plug and play. Put the stuff in there based off of situations that you will most likely encounter. Get some training. Learn how to do the things. And, then just be ready to act when it's time to act. Subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of stuff. More importantly, share this with a friend or family member. And until the next one, I'll catch you later.